Ed Lowe. I was an environmental scientist at the St. Johns River Water Management District for about 34 years. For most of that time, I was Director of Environmental Sciences in the Water Resources Department. Following that, I was the district's first and only Chief Scientist. So in that job, we worked on all sorts of environmental restoration issues throughout the St. Johns District, which covers about the fifth of the state in northeast Florida. Yeah, well, in the studies and investigations that have been done on the potential for restoration of the Ocklawaha River, one of the things that has struck me is that most of the work is very locally focused, looking at the reservoir itself and that portion of the river that would be affected by restoration of that part of the Ocklawaha River. However, I don't think that we can fully understand the significance of that restoration unless we back up and look at it as a broader scale issue. It's really about the restoration of 4 different ecosystems. The Silver Springs, which is the major source of water for the lower Ocklawaha River, has suffered about a 95% reduction in fish abundance since Howard Odom investigated it in the 50s. So part of it would be improving the condition of the Silver Springs. The lower Ocklawaha itself lost thousands of acres of floodplain swamp. That swamp is incredibly valuable in terms of the price that the state of Florida has put on mitigation for forested wetlands. You talking about figures in the neighborhood of $70,000 per acre. So that's extremely valuable habitat. In addition to the lower St. Johns, we're looking at an increased flow of fresh water, cooler fresh water, to the estuary of the St. Johns River. That's incredibly important for the many species of freshwater and estuarine invertebrates and vertebrates that use the St. Johns River. And then finally, the river flows into the Atlantic Bight, which is that portion of the Atlantic Ocean that is adjacent to Georgia and Florida, the coastal waters. And many of our commercially important species of fish and invertebrates use all of these systems for their life cycle, for reproduction, and as nursery grounds. So we're talking about improving the condition of 4 different ecosystems, each one of them having great regional significance, and even to an extent global significance. For example, Silver Springs is a first magnitude spring and indeed one of the largest flowing freshwater springs in the world. So that's not a small deal. The Ocklawaha River is a subtropical river. In the United States, there are not many examples of that. The Ocklawaha was once incredibly beautiful and rich in biodiversity and species abundance. So that would be improved. The St. Johns River is an important estuary for the entire east coast of the United States. For example, the southernmost population of the American shad occurs in the St. Johns River and nowhere else. So the American shad, American eel, other species that migrate between the ocean and the fresh waters historically used the St. Johns River, and some of these had great commercial significance before the damming, that is. And then finally you have the Atlantic Bight, the southeastern Atlantic Bight, and there a lot of these species complete their life cycles. For instance, the white shrimp will reproduce offshore, and then the juveniles will move into the estuary. Blue crabs use the estuary and in fact go up into the lower Ocklawaha. And then we're also considering the importance on endangered species such as the manatee. So there's literally a plethora of environmental biological issues that would be addressed by this one act of restoration. So I think in terms of the cost benefit and the environmental lift that we would get, it's certainly the project that stands out as the one that needs to be done for the St. Johns River at this time. It's maybe not widely appreciated, but the lower St. Johns River, for a long part of its reach, is tidal and often at sea level. The mixture of the fresh water coming from the Ocklawaha and from the middle St. Johns mixing with the salt water that comes in with the tides creates an estuary. And they're important for a myriad of species that don't have direct economic importance but are incredibly important ecologically speaking. The lower St. Johns is one of these estuaries. Its location in the southern United States means that it has a very high species diversity because you get a mixing of warm water and cooler water species there. So this is an enormously important estuary economically. It would be benefited by a free-flowing Ocklawaha River. And indeed, for thousands of years, the species that used the estuary would use the lower Ocklawaha as one of its freshwater areas where juveniles could mature, and in some cases even adults would move up far up the estuary into the Ocklawaha and into Lake George. To this day, Lake George has many species of estuarine and even marine fishes that use it. Historically, some species of rays would move clear up into the upper St. Johns. So it's very much connected to the ocean, and the integrity of both systems, the coastal oceanic waters and the fresh waters, both enhance each other and are integrally linked. Early on, some of the work that was done at the district while I was Director of Environmental Sciences did give us some concern that there would be impacts due to enrichment with nitrogen in the estuary. But subsequent work over the last 10 or more years, including some very sophisticated modeling work, has shown that the water quality effects would be minimal, negligible in fact. You weigh that against the lift in terms of species diversity and abundance of fish and invertebrates, and clearly I think the scales tipped in favor of doing the restoration. And that's not even considering the other benefits such as improvement of the water budget due to decreased evapotranspiration, and the enormous lift that would come from restoring the floodplain wetlands of the lower Ocklawaha. You know, floodplain wetlands, marshes and swamps are known to be very productive biologically speaking. And as when the water levels are high, they serve as a nursery ground for fish and invertebrates. And then going through the cycles of wet periods and dry periods, during the dry periods, as the waters come off of the floodplain wetlands, the production that was produced there is concentrated in the deeper waters. And that provides an opportunity for some really good sport fishing and also gives a boost to predatory species. So that's part of it. There's also some more arcane, if you will, phenomena that occur, such as nitrogen fixation and denitrification. The nitrogen balance is regulated by these floodplain swamps to a great degree. They can serve as an area for deposition of phosphorus that impacts the phosphorus cycling. They, of course, produce oxygen and can consume CO2, carbon dioxide in terms of building up the floodplain soils. Those soils can become a reservoir for storage of carbon. So in terms of nutrient cycling and the production of fish and wildlife, they're very, very valuable. Part of the work of the Water Management District while I was there was trying to put back together the floodplain ecosystem that had been drained and converted to agriculture in the upper St. Johns and in the middle St. Johns. So along the St. Johns River, the major area that's left in terms of putting back together the ecosystem that once was is the lower Ocklawaha and the thousands of acres of floodplain wetland that were also there, in this case, mown down, flooded, and really converted to lake-type habitat. Florida has an abundance of lakes, but Florida has lost a large share of its wealth of wetlands that it once had. And this is a step toward restoring that. And by bringing those wetlands back, we bring back the St. Johns River, which is, of course, everyone appreciates the beauty of the St. Johns and its value for recreation, for spiritual enrichment. The values go on and on. But this is the last, most obvious piece of trying to put together the St. Johns River. It's the restoration of the lower Ocklawaha and its floodplain wetlands. Regionally, in terms of what's left to be done, I think you could call it the Everglades of the North. It's certainly going to have a much lower price tag, but the benefits will have broad-scale effects, which is kind of like what would happen with the Everglades, and the effects on the Atlantic Ocean, the Silver Springs. It's smaller scale, but as far as this part of the world goes, it's the last big piece that we need to do. I guess I would say that in, the last 50 years, for the last 50 years, we've essentially put a tourniquet on one of the major arteries of the St. Johns River. And you can put a tourniquet on your leg, but if you don't open it up enough, the leg is going to die. And what's happened with this is that this tourniquet has been on there long enough. The reason that it was originally done has long since passed away. This is the right thing to do. It's the thing we need to do now. We need to take the tourniquet off the lower St. Johns River and let it flow free and become once again the artery, the major artery of the lower St. Johns.